I'm Aryeh Schwartz, and welcome to the Winsidr show, where it's all about the W. I'm very excited for this episode as we continue our series of going in depth on each team in the league. This episode, we welcome to the show WNBA legend and champion Tully Bevilaqua to the show to chat all things Indiana Fever. If you like our show, please consider joining our Patreon community, patreon.com/Winsidr. For less than a cup of coffee a month, you can directly show support for the hard work we do covering the W. And don't forget to see our amazing staff's written content over at winsidr.com. And remember, download the episode. It makes our stats look better and allows us to continue doing this important work. Tully Bevilaqua, welcome to the show. Very excited, as always, to chat WNBA with you. How you doing? How is I don't know if we're technically in summer yet, but how's the weather treating you? How you doing?
May, I am doing great. Let me just say that intro music just there had me like vibing. I had visions of a ball in my hand, or a little ball handling crossovers between the legs. It was, yeah, it set a good vibe. It set a good vibe. I'm doing great though.
That's amazing. It's funny because a friend of mine made it, and every time we've done episodes where we don't play it live during the recording, I can tell my excitement and energy is a little bit lower in those episodes versus the episodes with the music. So I guess there's something to it.
Oh, it sure is. I mean, it's just like anything, when you go work out or if you're getting ready for the game and you got the music, the music is very important. So it's all part of the package, isn't it? Whether you're playing or whether you're working, it just gets you hyped up.
Wait a second. This brings me to the most random question I've always wanted to ask a player.
Yep.
When you're listening to your pregame music, like I know everyone's got their like pregame rituals and whatnot. And this is going to sound so ridiculous, but as a very young kid, the last time I played any sort of actual team sports, I'd always get like over energized by music and then use all like just, exhaust my energy very early on because I was so hyped up by the music. Do athletes, like real athletes like you, sometimes like lessen the hypeness of the music or the fast pacedness of the music to like not overexert themselves early on, or is that just ridiculous?
No, Celine Dion was not in my repertoire before I went out to play, although I do love her music. She wasn't part of my pregame ritual music. No, I mean, everyone's got something different that they like to jam out to, but I was very much a Akadaka, the AC/DC, White Snake. I'm a kid grew up in the 80s, the 80s music. So no, it had to be up tempo and hyped up for me to stay at that level for the start of the game.
Oh yeah, you got to have that. Well, let's talk about the game. Let's talk about the Indiana Fever, a very interesting team. A team that honestly, for better or for worse, I mean, I think if you're the coach, the GM, the players, you can use this as pinboard material either way, right? If you're the top team, you can use it as pinboard material. If you're the bottom team, you can use it as pinboard material just to hype yourself up. But what kind of give me a little checking in from training camp? What are your thoughts? What are you hearing? What are they saying?
Well, I just say the Fever, I think, are kind of like that unknown right now. People aren't sure where to put them, but it's kind of exciting because they are a team of great players, and they may not have the star names this season. Like obviously, you've lost your Candace Dupree, Natalie Chalmers gone, Erica Wheeler's gone, but you look at them on paper, they're a team of great players. So I think what's coming out of training camp is, okay, what we have to do as a team of great players is do everything great. And so Marianne Stanley is very much on about trying to get consistency with her players. There's a lot for these players. Obviously, with so many new players, a lot to digest. But what I'm hearing from training camp is like defense. That is a focal point for the Fever.
And it has to be, because you look at this roster, they have a ton of offensive weapons. I mean, when you talk about big name players on this roster, they have high draft picks. They have players who have excelled at the college level and players who I think it's fair. You could, say haven't lived up to potential, but arguably it's kind of the potential, or not the potential, but the standards that we've put on them just based on where they were picked. But consistency is kind of the key, right? Consistency in defense. But we'll get into that. Has there been any talk of Victoria Vivian's? Like, I know, coming from, what was it? She got injured 2 years ago, then got injured again last year.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just a rough outing for her beginning of the season. A player who, if correct me if I'm wrong, in her rookie year with Kelsey Mitchell, was dropping three balls like it was raining. I think they set a record for like rookie and second year player. Maybe they were both rookies of the year. It's been a long period of time prepping for all these different podcasts, so I apologize if
That's all right. My name is Tully Bevilaqua, not Sue Bird.
There we go. Or Lauren Jackson,
Well, yeah.
I'm Aryeh Schwartz, not Lauren Jackson, is what I should be saying to you. But I mean, this team has the offensive weapons. But back to Victoria, has there been is she looking good? Is she expected full go? Is there minutes restrictions? I just hope that she can finally play a full season out.
Oh, for sure. I mean, when she went down with that injury a couple of years ago now, it was. I mean, had she not picked up that injury, I think that season would have looked different for the Indiana Fever, because she just brings such a different dynamic to the team, because she extends the floor so much. I mean, she shoots a half-court shot like she does a free throw. It makes me sick how easy she makes it look. But I spoke to her the other day in a media Zoom, and she is ready and raring to go. She said her body's feeling good. And she's just hungry. I mean, you would be, wouldn't you, when, your last two seasons, you've been on the sidelines more than on the court. So she's just really hungry to go. And she had a good hit out yesterday in their preseason game against the Chicago Sky. She ended up with 12 points. I didn't get to see the game myself. I was celebrating Mother's Day, but she was 5 from. Thank you very much. I've recovered now. It was she was 5 from 9 from the floor. 2 of those were 3-point shots. And I think what Tori's going to do for this team is, and it'll be interesting to see what defenses do initially with her at the beginning, because they know she can shoot the three and she's got that depth. So she's kind of like a 4-point range shooter. So will the teams kind of challenge her early on because she hasn't played, and try and make her prove herself with the consistency from beyond the 3-point line? And will they extend their defense out to her, which then opens up the middle? Will they pack it in still, see if she knocks down a couple? That's the exciting thing I think that she's going to bring to the team.
Yeah, and oh my God, her shooting is ridiculous. Another player who I'm excited to kind of see hopefully get a real opportunity this season is Lauren Cox. I mean, last season, I believe she comes in late to the bubble. Mm-hmm. There was shrouded in mystery a lot of times what time players came in, and what with the quarantine and all that, it wasn't the most obvious thing. She's a player that I'm excited to see grow in the Marion Stanley era of this team, and we're going to see what she can do. For me, though, you touched on consistency, and like I said, we're going to get to that in a moment. I want to talk about this roster, because when you look at this roster, you look at some vets that have screamed consistency. When I think of Jessica Breland, I think of consistency. Jantel Lavender, consistency. D-Rob, consistency. And you mix them with this influx of younger players, and it's almost at the point where we can't continue calling Kelsey Mitchell a young player anymore.
No,
right?
She's kind of nearly a vet now in this game.
Which is just mind-blowing crazy. I'm going to run down the 10 players in my mind who are locks. And then we're gonna list the other ones. And I'm just curious for you, just positionally, what you kind of see as needs for this team. If you have an opinion on which players, maybe. Because here's the thing. I haven't been there. You haven't been there. Most media, as far as I know, no media has been able to actually get into the training camps. They're locked training camps. So it's really kind of a game of deciphering what coaches and players are saying to try and figure out who's actually doing good. So I'll list it. We'll talk roster for a little bit, and then we're going to move on to strengths and weaknesses. Just going down the line, I mean, Jantel Lavender, that's a lock. Danielle Robinson, that's a lock. Tiffany Mitchell, that's a lock. Kelsey Mitchell, that's a lock. Jessica Breland, Lauren Cox, Tiara McCowan, Victoria Vivians, Kathleen Doyle, I think is, just my sense. And then Aaliyah Wilson, Kaiser Gondrezick, sorry if I mispronounced that name, Chelsea Perry, and Lindsay Allen. are kind of the players, those four last players are kind of the ones that are on the bubble. Now, my assumption is when you draft a player, you've put a little bit more stock into them. Now, that's not to say if you get an opportunity at a player that fits the system better and is more pro ready now, that you might not, take a flyer on that draft pick and keep a player like a Lindsey Allen.
Mhm.
But I'm just curious for you, like, what are your thoughts on this roster? Who can kind of make up those last two spots?
Well, I think you're right. It's going to be a lot of these last couple of days going into training camp before the season. It's going to be very competitive for some of those guards. Obviously, when Julie Allemand, when it was known that she wasn't going to be back for either the whole season, part of the season, the FIFA stocked up on guards to try and get the best out of what was available to fill her spot. It is going to be a competition. I agree with Lindsey Allen. I feel Kaiser, because your first round draft pick gives you a little bit more stock. Um, I feel like she has also become a bit of a face of the team early on as well. Obviously, picked up a big endorsement. Yeah. So, I kind of feel like maybe that we will be seeing her on the roster. You know what? Wilson is coming. That's going to be a tough one. She's going to have to come in and these next few days, I think, as well, and have a good hit out. She'll bring some defensive toughness, I think, from the perimeter. But like you said, it's how you're going to fit some of these players in there when you've only got so many roster spots left. Who I was impressed with was Chelsea Perry. Although not a guard, switching gears here, Chelsea Perry, I think, might find a spot for herself on the roster because she's kind of like a four, but she's a stretch four. And I mean, she had a great hit out yesterday against the Sky. She nailed 3 of her 4 3-point attempts. And when I'm talking about one of their strengths later on, I'm going to be talking about the floor spacing. And her game can definitely help spread the floor for the Fever. So she's put herself in a good position as well to find herself on the roster.
I'm excited about this team because, as we touched on earlier, there's a lot of question marks. There's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of players who I think a lot of us, if you were defending that player, you would have when you watch the film of a lot of these players, it's nightmare invoking. And I don't mean that in the sense of we're talking about a championship contender team. I'm talking about some of the quickest shooters in the league are on this team. And now
Mm-hmm.
they've added in legitimate veteran pieces. And I don't want to look at past Fever teams, but I agree with you where, a few injuries don't happen and you're looking at a very, very different team. I always like to start with a negative and move to the positive, although you can always flip the weakness to a positive. So,
Mm-hmm.
you might be one of those great interviewers who's like, what's your greatest weakness? I try too hard. Let's talk about the
Myself.
weakness. Yeah, right. What is the weakness of this team? Because I'm glad you spoke about in the training camps the stress of defense, because
Mm-hmm.
watching this team last year in the bubble, it's very obvious they have the very different offensive tools. But last year, it was also very very clear that defense was not their backbone, was not their strong suit. So I'm excited to see that. And if this team can start getting, some more defensive stands, some more, defensive strength, that hard-nosed, tough defensive style that honestly I think of when I think of the Indiana Fever, not based on a specific team, just when I see the logo, I think hard-nosed, tough defense, diving for the balls, arguably not the quote-unquote most talented team, but they will outwork you to even the score. Talk to me about weakness in defense with this team, or I shouldn't even put that in your mouth. What do you think the weakness is?
Well, I'm going to say that. I mean, just reiterate the defense only because they've got to prove themselves. Obviously, on paper they should be better, but obviously, just got to see that transition now from training camp to the games, and particularly the areas that Coach Stanley is the utmost important to start with is transition defense. Just too many times we saw in the bubble, teams getting the rebounds, getting the outlet, and just being able to take the ball all the way to the middle of the keyway, before the play was stopped. I mean, that just can't happen. So I think there's been a lot of emphasis on, picking up the ball early, stopping that early transition, and then, getting the players. I mean, it's easier said than done, obviously, but just get them to realize, like, when you're in transition defense, it's all about just pick up the closest player, and then as you progress, you can switch and communicate and do whatever. But it's like, pick up a player that's close to you. But transition defense, obviously, that one-on-one, you don't want to have to always rely on the team defense, because at some stage you've got to be able to be accountable for that one-on-one defense as well. So then there's that, and then it's like peeling an onion, isn't it? Like, this the next layer, the next layer. But at the end of the day, it's also that then has to result in a rebound. And defensively, the Fever were ranked last. They were the worst, team defensively in the league last year. So the good news is you can only go up, right?
Yeah.
so we're going to spin it into a positive now. But I mean, it's not like, it's just, they're not changes that are crazy requests by the coach. They're just fundamental. Well, there's my dog just saying hi to you. It's just fundamental changes that, just take a lot of effort and communication that they can easily turn around and switch, flick the switch on this year's defensive team and make it a really good team defensively.
Well, I've always said, like, I'm blanking on who said this. I think we had Brian Agler on the show a long time ago, and I was during like a finals maybe, and I asked him, talking about defense, whatever is, and he quoted some famous person I'm blanking on now, and he said, defense is 95% effort.
Mm-hmm.
You put, we were talking about the likes of Elena Beard, who is just one of the greatest defenders, or Tamika Catchings. Two. That was probably more accurate to bring up now. Two of the greatest defenders in league history, and so much of it comes down to just never giving up an effort. And I think, a big question when we talk about this team is interior defense and the likes of the duo of Cox and McCowan, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I love Jessica Breland. Don't get me wrong. I view Jessica Breland. I haven't seen her play in a little bit, but
I was going to say, we haven't seen her and we haven't seen Lavender
in a while. But they're two players, that I'm really hyped on, and I think most fans listening to this podcast are going to say, yeah. And as hyped as we are on Lavender and Breland, we also kind of hope that we don't see as many minutes of them, because we want to see that growth of a young player like Lauren Cox, of the young player like Tiara McCowan. Has there been any public discussion of that? Because that's kind of been always like the outside voices of, like, McCowan's not getting enough minutes, and that's been like the open criticism. And I understand it, because I think it's kind of finding that balance, but I'm curious for your much wiser basketball mind to explain this to the plebeians like me. But like, when you talk about transition defense and players getting back, a lot of times that falls upon your 4 and your 5, the bigs being able to hustle back. Let's say your point guard, your Kelsey Mitchell, drives to the paint, misses a layup, or gets rejected or whatever. A lot of that falls on other players. It's not as easy as just saying the guard needs to get back. So talk to me about like what that means for the bigs on this team, and stepping up their defensive game.
Gotcha. Well, I still put the emphasis initially on the guards when it comes to transition defense, because I mean, even if it's your point guard that's in for the layup, your 2s and your 3s need to be understanding where they are on the court, who needs to get back to first be that safety, and then be the communicator, obviously, as everybody flows back. Yeah, it's Tiara McCowan is a big body. It's a big ask. She's battling under the basket for the rebounds and stuff, and then all of a sudden, she's also going to be sprinting the floor. It's a big ask, and like you said, it does come down to effort. But I think not players, sorry. I think fans were expecting maybe to see Tiara a little more out there on the floor last season, but it's hard to comment about the last season in the bubble, because I mean, there were so many things going on dynamically, physically. You don't know how players were doing. Fatigue and lack of preseason and things like that. So, it was a rough season, I think, for the coaches to get through they themselves with just trying to rotate players and keeping everybody fresh. And obviously the Fever had a really tough time of it, with injuries and what so. I kind of have gone on a bit now. I've forgotten where I was going with that.
No, you're totally fine. But honestly, hearing you bring that up is really interesting, and I would love some like deep analytics person to do a study on, because talking to a lot of coaches going into the bubble last year, or the wobble, whichever is the preference these days. One of the things that was always brought up was like, look, I have some players who played overseas. I have some players who have been locked in their apartment on the 18th floor for the last X many months. I have some players who own a house with a backyard hoop. And like, I would love some deep analytic dives of players who like lived in apartments versus lived in houses versus like guards versus bigs, and like how their normal minutes or conditioning was affected because of COVID. And like, obviously, look, if you got COVID, it was affected in a very different way. But just like the ripple effects of being in lockdowns and stuff like that, I would be really interested, because in my assumption, it would affect the bigs a little bit more. But that's just because I was never a big. So I don't know. This is normally when Rachel comes in and tells me I'm crazy and wrong.
Yeah, that's foreign language to me as well. Yeah, that's a foreign language. But you're right. I mean, it would make for a good YouTube video, just to, even if there was like clips of what players were doing. It's like you said, in apartments. Okay, well, what exercises can you do in an apartment to keep that level of fitness up to a certain level? There were probably a lot of imagination going on with what you had to work with. So that's a story in itself for sure.
Well, no, I was just going to say, I know my exercise for the first 3 months of COVID was playing Wii bowling with my wife. So like, and that's because we were stuck in an apartment with no roof, and it was serious lockdown. So I think, it's and look, some people aren't able to travel and go see their friends. But let's talk about strength of this team, because we've talked weakness. Right. We've talked about this roster, and looking at this roster makeup, I mean, it looks like an offensive dream for this team, right? This team has so many offensive weapons. The tools for this style of offense, for that style of offense. We saw how quick they can be. Shout out to that win over the Seattle Storm this last season in the bubble. I think that kind of opened some people's eyes. And yes, there were some sound clips from Marion that got blown out of proportion, and I think a lot of people had that overshadow what we saw on the court that night. And I went back and I looked at some tape from that game, and it got me excited for this team and this coming season. Is it too simplistic to say shooters and offense is the strength of this team?
No, I don't think so. I think you kind of must have been looking somehow into my notes, talking about some of the Fever strengths, but no, I don't think so. And I do believe that has to be a strength of the team this year. And to break that down, they need to be an exceptional transition team, offensive transitional team. They have so many quick wings in this lineup now that they really need to utilize it. I mean, we haven't even touched on Tiffany Mitchell that much right now, but you've got Kelsey Mitchell that she turns the jets on and only needs a couple of dribbles to be down the other end. It's just unbelievable. Tiffany Mitchell running the wings looks in fantastic shape. She says she's feeling in the best shape she's ever been, and just looks fantastic. And I'm expecting a really big season from Tiffany Mitchell. I mean, she's been in the league for 5 years. She had some more offensive production in the bubble, but now what I want to see from her is more consistency with that. And so I'm expecting big things from Tiffany Mitchell. You've got Kaiser running the floor. You've got D-Rob, on the outlet pass, looking up the floor. I mean, there's a lot of speed in this team. So if they can score, if they can double their productivity in the transition game, then they're putting themselves in a good position to win the game. And then you take it to the next step, and it's like, well, okay, you're pushing the floor, you're not getting anything, but you've now got the ability to space the floor because, you've got shooters on the wings, which then is going to open up the floor for Big T. And I'm going to put that as a strength for the Fever, is Big T in the low block. I mean, she shoots at like 56%, I want to say, from the field. And when she gets the ball underneath the basket, she's unstoppable, really. And so before teams, were collapsing in on her, 2, 3 players sometimes, but if the perimeter players for the Fever can knock down some of those outside shots, it's going to just open up that keyway for T to work more one-on-one. And she's done a lot of work, obviously stayed home, worked on her game in the off season here. And Marianne Stanley is very excited about what she's seen so far from her in training camp. So yeah, the transition game, the floor spacing are all going to be huge strengths for the Fever. And I think the other positive is like they've had most of their players together in training camp, so the team chemistry should be there. I would say potentially more so than some of the other teams who are still waiting on players to come back from, overseas, and may not have some of them for a good chunk of the earlier portion of the season. So that team chemistry as well, if they can get that together quicker than other teams and pick up those early wins before teams get to full strength, that's going to be huge for confidence. And yeah, I mean, then we see what the Fever can really do with this lineup.
Oh yeah, and hearing you talk, I was thinking like if I was going to put it in different words, one of the strengths is one-on-one ball because you look at this team and there's a lot of players who can excel where you want to be doubling them, you want to be tripling them. Big T down low. There's not many other bigs in the league who can throw down with her. And that's a reason why they picked her so early. That's a reason why so many of the fans have been so excited for those matchups. I mean, like I circle the big matchups, right? When she's going against the Brittany Grinders, right? When she's going against, I'm excited. Unfortunately, if I read the schedule correctly, I apologize if it did not. The early games against New York, it looks like Natasha Howard will not be there. So I'm a little bit disappointed in that. Was excited to see some banging down low with that. But then also Indiana versus Minnesota is a game where like, sorry, Sylvia Fowles. Right? Like I'm just excited for that like juggernaut box out matchup down low. It's just going to be a heavyweight bout that I'm excited for. But then you look at that, and if you're not double teaming these players down low, and then you talk about the shooters on the wing that they got. I mean, this team has the ability, and I feel like I've said this before with this team. They have so much potential. They have such a good ceiling, and we're about to talk ceiling and floor, so maybe I'm bearing the lead on this. They have such a big ceiling that for me it's just like it's one of those situations of like fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. And I feel like I'm at the point where it's third time. Okay, I'm not going to get my hopes up too high. I want to see what you guys can deliver first. Let's talk ceiling and floor of this team. I mean, for me, the floor obviously is last place. We've seen it.
Yes.
Fine. Look at the past couple seasons. The ceiling for this team, I'm like, I could easily say the 8th seed and make the playoffs. I'm going to go wild here and say a 7th seed and not be the last team going into the playoffs, because it's just a matter of like, if you remember going into last year, a lot of people were much higher on this team than they are today. And I think sometimes, it would be a disservice to look at the bubble season in Bradenton as a wash. But I also think it really, like when you look at the likes of Atlanta, another team that was affected by COVID, another team that last year was slightly disappointing for them. I think there's almost an element of, all right, you know what, last year happened, but we don't need to reset our expectations, but we can't use last year as a reason why we're just going to like destroy all expectations.
Every team had reasons and stuff. Everyone went through the same things in the bubble and that, so you can't, we got to kind of like move on to get past last year. But now if you're talking to Tamika Catchings, obviously the ceiling is that championship. So that's the ceiling coming from the boss. But no, I think I am. There's just an air. It's just weird I feel about this team that it's where can that ceiling be? And I think definitely they can be in that. You're looking at the teams and being realistic. Maybe that top portion of the bottom part of the 8, but that 6, 7. 6, 7 range. But I don't want to. I'm not going to be unrealistic because obviously, they got a lot to prove. But I'm with you on that. I feel like definitely they can make the playoffs. Um, and if, they can work that consistency, they can get that balance with improvement from the outside offensive threat. That's going to just make it even more, like I said, even more potentially big T's time this year to really just kind of like show how dominant she can be in the paint. And like I said, I'm very excited with those Sylvia Fowl matchups too, because the Indiana Fever, Minnesota Lynx matchups in the past have been real special games to watch. But yeah, I believe I agree with you. Let's say set that expectation maybe around that seventh spot.
And here's the thing. I think a lot of people might go look at the record over the past couple of years. You guys are crazy, but when you take record out and you look at who's on this roster, there you go. Oh, that's when you have that aha moment. And I keep bringing back to that because I really like. While I might have some questions about the paycheck that some of these players are getting in comparison to their counterparts around the league, but I still like the makeup of this roster. So call me crazy, whatever. I've been hyped on Jantel Lavender for a while. Like last season with the injury, I thought that was a much bigger blow to Chicago at the time before she ends up, coming out over to Indiana.
When she was with LA, she played a pivotal role in the successes that they had, like just that complementary player. And I've always been big on her game. And to me, she's kind of like taking over the role of like a Natalie Chalmers. And so that's how I kind of, see that exchange being. But I've always been big on Lavender. I feel like, she's been that player that's hurt you when you've kind of focused on, some of the other players in the team. She was always one that came out and was just nailing those 15-foot jump shots. Always having to be at the right place at the right time. So, yeah, very excited to see what she can do. And then, Breland, I just see her as just that blue collar workhorse that just gets it done. There's no frills about it. It's just she just gets it done.
She reminds me so much of a Rebecca Brunson style player. Like not gonna get all the flashiness. If you look in the stat books, fine, you'll notice her, you'll recognize her. But so much of the things that she does don't come up on the stat sheet. So much of it is honestly like she fits so well with the Indiana Fever culture organization that I'm just excited not only to see her back in the league because she has a great story and she's had a great career so far, but also with this team and teaching some of these younger players about those intangibles that are so important. Now, key player, and for me, the key player is who kind of moves the needle between the ceiling and the floor. I'll let you go first. I have one player in mind, but I don't want to lead you with it, so I'll let you go first.
I know she's come back from injury, but I do see Tori as being somebody that can move that needle, and hopefully, injury free. She's someone that I think just gives something so different that is unique and can really make a huge difference on this team. Gosh, I got the Mitchells. Can I package them up together? The Mitchells.
Yeah, totally. I do Vanderquigs together. We can do the Mitchells.
Yeah,
together.
Let's do the Mitchells together. Kelsey Mitchell is. She had a great season last year in the bubble, and it's come out in preseason again. And I think she's going to kind of like somewhat carry this team offensively. But that's what she's used to anyway. So it's not like there's any extra pressure on her because that's what she loves to do. I see her continuing on that. But so we know what we're going to get from her. Big T.
That's mine.
Yeah, that's it's like I don't want to put all this pressure on these players who've only been in the league for a couple of years. But it's Tori and Big T. I think for me that could really change that mark and take them towards that ceiling.
Totally. I mean, because for me, it's the combination with Tori. She brings that element that this team is missing. That kind of it's that last puzzle piece that really allows everyone to spread out and get the
Mm,
spacing that you desire. With McCowan, it's like, I understand you're a young player. So I'm not putting this pressure on you in the sense of like it's do or die for you. I'm putting this pressure on you in the sense of for this team to have that success. I've seen what Kelsey Mitchell can do, and I think
mm.
she's still growing and tapping into that. And we often say that 3 to 5 year range, or at least when I say we, I mean me,
Yeah.
that 3 to 5 year range, third season to fifth season, maybe even sixth season sometimes. And hey, if the NCAA gave another year of eligibility from COVID year, why don't we give players who were in
True.
that 3 to
Yep.
5 year during the bubble a
Give them
sixth
another
year?
year. Hmm.
Yeah, and I think Kelsey Mitchell is really one of those players who maybe she didn't start as hot as everyone wanted to her in her first couple seasons, but she started to pick up steam, and now she's really rolling. And for me, the missing thing that's really going to set this team on fire or give this team a fever, I didn't have a better pun there, is going to be McCowan.
Get the
Yeah.
drums out.
But I mean, I just think having that strong, big post presence, controlling the paint, being effective on both sides of the ball
Yeah.
is just going to do so much for this team. Like, all right, the takeaway from this episode from you and me, I think is simple to say. This team has a lot of potential and is flying under the radar, right?
Yes, totally agree. And yeah, I think people will find out very quickly that, I mean, the Fever, even you look at their record from last year, they were 6-16, but they were competitive for the majority of those losses. I want to say they were. And I feel like some of those close losses that didn't go their way last season, I have a feeling they're going to get more of those going their way this season. So teams cannot sleep on the Indiana Fever for sure. But going back to Big T, there is nobody. I mean, I don't know if you can. I mean, Sylvia Fowles is a strong player, but Big T is just special. I mean, she's just so strong, and I think it's just going to come down to herself and her ability to, slow herself down in the moment and read what's going on, read the defense, and make the right decision with the ball in her hands at that time. And so that'll be, I think, that's going to be the determining factor of how good she's going to be this year. Because I don't feel like anyone can really stop her physically one-on-one. So now it's just going to come down to her getting that really good positioning in the keyway, getting nice and deep. So she just has to, turn over a shoulder, not have to, make too many moves to get to the basket. She has improved her shooting though, and her free throw shooting is getting better because she is going to get fouled a lot. So she needs to become a better free throw shooter. I think she shot at 75% last year, which was a much improved percentage from her first year. But I think, when you talk about two players that are so totally different than the others in the team, Tori and Big T, just have that uniqueness about them.
Love it. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Remind everyone where they can see your WNBA thoughts and where they can hear your voice.
Well, they can, not only is it my WNBA thoughts, I guess it's my life thoughts. My life thoughts can be on Twitter is where you'll find me mostly. Bevilaqua 41. If you forget how to spell it, just Google it. But that's where you can find most of my thoughts. And but yes, I am excited. I'm going to be a part of the commentary team again this year with the Indiana Fever. So I will be behind the microphone calling the shots, and look forward to catching up with you again during the season to see if what we have gone through just now is looking good.
I hope we're right. We'll sound like geniuses. It will be definitely worth it. And also, I love your flex of being like, just look my name up. I have a Wikipedia page. Just check it.
My son did tell me that he did not think it was fair that Wikipedia knew more about me than what he did. So he was a little bit upset by that when he came and told me. And my first thought was, what are you doing looking up Wikipedia?
Well, now I'm just thinking you have a perfect excuse to just give him like, stories of your old days, right? Like, well, I want to chant. Let me tell you the story of when LJ and I did this.
Yeah, no, he's banned from listening to the Laid Back with LJ and Tully podcast.
I love it. Tully, thank you so much for your time. You have a great start to the week, rest of your week, and I can't wait to hear your voice covering some Fever games this season.
All right, matey. Well, you guys do a great job there. And look, I look to all your stuff to get a lot of my information as well. So kudos to you guys.
I appreciate you. You have a great day.
All right, matey.